The town of Moon Hill had always been a quiet place, where the residents went to bed early and the nights were so dark that the stars seemed about to fall from the sky. But lately the nights had become strange. People talked about lights appearing in the woods outside of town and whispers that were only heard after midnight. Katya, a student, had come here on vacation to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city. She was staying with her aunt in a house on the outskirts, not far from the forest. "Don't go near the forest at night," Aunt Nina said sternly at dinner. "There's something bad there." "What is it?" Katya asked curiously. Some people saw lights, others heard voices, and once a guy went in there and didn't come back. Katya only smiled. She thought her aunt just believed in old village superstitions. At night, Katya was lying in bed when a strange light suddenly came through the thin curtains. It was soft, bluish, as if someone had turned on a lamp just outside the window. "Must be the moon," she muttered, but curiosity overcame sleepiness. She walked over to the window and looked out. The light came from deep in the forest. It flickered and intensified, as if beckoning. Katya quickly threw on her jacket, took the flashlight and went out into the yard. "It's no big deal. I'll just check it out," she said to herself as she headed toward the forest. When Katya entered the forest, she was struck by a strange silence. No sound of wind, no rustling of animals, only the faint flicker of light ahead. The deeper she went, the more she felt a strange pressure in her chest, as if the air had become dense. The light brought her to a small clearing. In the center stood a stone circle, and above it hovered something strange and oval, shimmering surface, reminiscent of liquid, but at the same time transparent, like glass. Katya stepped closer. Inside this mirror she saw a distorted reflection of the forest, but the forest was gloomy, empty, as if it was from another world. "What is it?" she whispered. When she reached for the shimmering surface, her hand went through it as if through water. And then she heard a voice. "You found us." Katya recoiled, but the next moment she felt her hand grasped by something cold, and she began to be pulled inside. Her scream echoed through the night forest, and the light disappeared, leaving the darkness behind. Katya woke up, lying on the cold, damp ground. The air around her was thick with dust and moisture, and the sky was a strange gray shade, without a single ray of light. She rose to her feet, trying to figure out where she was. The forest around her was similar to the one she had seen through the window, but everything seemed wrong. The trees were twisted, their branches like arms reaching for the sky, and the grass underfoot was black and crunched with every step. "What is this place?" whispered Katya, looking around. She noticed that there were footprints around the stone circle she was in, as if other people had come here, but the footprints stopped at the edge of the forest, where a thick, wall-like haze began. Katya remembered the voice she'd heard before she'd been pulled inside the portal. "You found us. Who are you?" she shouted into the void. There was no answer, but a silhouette emerged from the mist. It was a man, tall and thin, his face concealed by a hood. "You shouldn't have come through here," he said, his voice hoarse and muffled. "I didn't want to," Katya objected. "I was just drawn in." "What is this place?" "It's a reflection of your world," he answered, "a world of shadows and oblivion. Those who once forgot themselves, but stayed here." The man came closer. His face became visible. It was a man, but his eyes were empty, like two black holes. "If you are here," he continued, "then the portal has chosen you." "Chosen for what?" Katya asked, feeling panic rising inside. "To close it." Katya didn't know what he was talking about, but before she could ask another question, the ground shook beneath her feet. "You must hurry," the man said. "If you stay here too long, it will swallow you up." Suddenly whispers began to come from the forest. They were barely audible, but they seemed familiar. "Katya, come back," the voices rang out, and they sounded like the voices of her family. She turned around, trying to find the source, but a man grabbed her arm. "Don't listen to them. They're not your loved ones. It's them." "Who are they?" she asked, pulling her hand away. "The ones who stayed here forever," he answered. Suddenly the whispers grew louder. Shadows began to emerge from the forest. They moved unevenly, as if they couldn't keep their balance, and their silhouettes were smeared like a vague memory. "Run," the man said quietly, "and find the door. It's your only chance to get out." Katya ran without looking back. The forest around her was changing. The trees grew taller and taller, their branches forming a tunnel, and ahead, through the fog, there was a faint light. Katya knew she had to go that way, but the whispers followed her, growing louder and louder. Stop. Stay with us. The voices seemed familiar, as if they were her loved ones speaking. When she reached the light, a massive door covered in strange symbols appeared in front of her. Light emanated from the keyhole, as if inviting her in. She reached out for the door, but suddenly felt cold fingers grasp her shoulder. Your soul belongs to us, whispered a voice behind her. Katya screamed and pushed the door open. Katya pushed the massive door open, and blinding light burst into her eyes. Behind her was a corridor going into infinity. Its walls were covered with glowing symbols that resembled ancient runes. As she took the first step, the door behind her closed with a rumble, cutting off the whispers and cold fingers that reached for her. What now? She whispered, feeling her words echoing in the depths of the corridor. Katya noticed that the symbols on the walls were changing. They were forming into images from her past. Here she was, as a child, playing in the yard. Here her parents were laughing in the kitchen. Here she was, seeing off a friend she had lost long ago. The farther she walked, the heavier her steps became. The images began to change. Now they were moments of pain, quarrels, losses, fears. Katya stopped, feeling tears come to her eyes. Why am I seeing this? She shouted. Because you brought them here, came a voice. She turned around. It was the same man with the empty eyes, but now his silhouette was transparent, almost invisible. You try to leave, but this world feeds on your memories. Every shadow here was once a man who has forgotten who he is. If you stop, you too will become one of them. But where do I go? Katya asked, feeling desperate. The man pointed forward. Find the source. Only he can close the portal. The corridor led her to a huge hall, in the center of which a glowing orb floated. It shimmered with different colors, as if energy raged inside it. Symbols swirled around the ball, as if magnetically drawn to its surface. Katya took a step forward, but immediately felt the air become dense. Silhouettes began to appear from the shadows in the corners of the hall. They were the shadows of people who froze in a mute scream. You're too close, came a high-pitched whisper. This is not for you. What is it? Katya asked, looking at the ball. It's the core of a portal, answered the voice of a man who appeared nearby. It opens the door between worlds. If you touch it, the portal will close, but there will be a heavy price to pay. What kind of payment? She said in a strangled voice. You will be bound to this world forever. The shadows began to approach. Katya realized she had no time to think. If I don't do this, what will happen? She asked. Then the portal will remain open, the man answered, and this world will swallow up yours. Katya looked at the glowing orb. Her heart was beating so hard that it felt like it was going to burst. She took a step forward and held out her hand. At that moment, the shadows pounced on her, enveloping her body like a cold fog. But Katya had already touched the orb. When her fingers made contact with the surface, a bright light filled the hall. Katya screamed, feeling her body filled with something inexplicable. The symbols swirling around the ball began to disappear, and with them the shadows began to dissolve. The last thing she heard was a man's voice. You have chosen. You are now a guardian. Katya woke up at the stone circle in the forest. The portal was gone, and with it the strange light. The forest was normal again, but there was a mark left in her hand, a glowing symbol that pulsed from time to time, reminding her of what had happened. She knew her life would never be the same, but she realized she had saved the world from something far worse. Sometimes, at night, she saw a faint light in the mirror. It was a portal that reminded her, if it opened again, she would have to go back. Katya sat on the porch of her aunt's house, looking out at the forest. The portal was gone, but traces of its presence remained. A glowing symbol pulsed in her hand, and sometimes she heard a faint whisper coming from deep within her mind. This isn't the end, is it? She asked quietly to herself. There was no answer, but the cold wind that came from the forest seemed to confirm her fears. The next night Katya awoke again at 3 o'clock with a strange sensation. It seemed to her that the room was colder. She looked around, but saw nothing unusual. When she went to the window, however, her gaze was caught by movement at the edge of the forest. Shadows. They moved slowly, as if they were searching for something. Katya grabbed her jacket and ran outside, heading toward the forest. It can't be, she whispered, but inside she already knew the answer. As she approached, the shadows receded, but in the center of the clearing, where the portal had been, now lay a stone with engraved symbols. It was warm to the touch and seemed to breathe, emitting a faint glow. It's left over from the core, she realized. But as soon as she touched the stone, the voices returned. You closed the portal, but the connection remains, said a familiar voice. Katya turned around. A man with empty eyes stood before her again, but now his silhouette was more obvious, almost human. You're a guardian. It's not just a title, it's a responsibility. The man pointed to a stone. This stone is the key to balance. If it falls into the wrong hands, the portal will open again. Whose hands? Katya asked, feeling her anxiety rising. The shadows want their power back, he answered. They will be looking for you to get the stone. Katya wanted to object, but felt the ground beneath her feet shake. The shadows began to thicken around the clearing, forming a ring. Their whispers intensified, and the cold became almost unbearable. Go away, shouted the man. Leave now. Katya grabbed the rock and ran back toward the house. On the way back, she could feel the shadows following her. They moved quickly, almost blending in with the branches of the trees, their voices echoing in her head. Give us back what is ours. When Katya reached the house, she slammed the door shut and pressed her back against it, breathing heavily. The whispers had died down, but her heart was beating so hard that it felt like it was about to jump out of her chest. She placed the stone on the table and examined it closely. The symbols on its surface began to glow, and she realized that the stone was not just a remnant of the portal, it was its heart. Katya realized her life was now tied to this stone. She was a guardian, but she would face a battle with shadows that would not let up until she had regained what she had lost. From that night on, Katya began to notice changes. Her dreams became more vivid, and whispers reminded her more often that the portal might open again. Sometimes, when she looked in the mirror, she saw shadows behind her, waiting quietly for her time. The stone she had brought from the clearing seemed to have a life of its own. The symbols on its surface faded and flared, and the air around it grew heavy, as if before a thunderstorm. Every night she heard the whispers of the shadows, more and more insistent now. We know where you are, the voices in her head. You can't stop us. Katya realized that the shadows would not leave her alone. One night, when Katya couldn't sleep again, the stone suddenly began to glow stronger. A thin beam of light burst out of it, shooting into the mirror in the corner of the room. The mirror trembled, and from its depths the same man with the empty eyes reappeared. The shadows are coming, he said. You have only until dawn. What am I to do? Katya asked, feeling fear gripping her heart. Protect the stone, he answered, but remember, if they get to it, the portal will open again, and the world you know will disappear. The man disappeared, and the mirror became ordinary. Katya took the stone and hid it in her backpack. She decided to leave the house, hoping she could lead the shadows away. But as soon as she stepped outside, the shadows appeared. They moved quickly, as if they were gliding across the ground, and their figures resembled human figures but were distorted, like in a bad dream. They surrounded her. Give me the stone, came a voice, and one of the shadows stepped forward. Her figure was taller than the others, and her eyes burned with a pale light. It's not yours, Katya replied, struggling to keep her voice from shaking. The shadow raised its hand, and the air around it became heavy. We were here first. You are only a guest in our world. Katya rushed to run toward the forest, where she hoped she could hide, but the shadows pursued her, their whispers growing louder. You won't escape. You're already part of it. In the forest, Katya noticed a faint glow in the distance. It resembled the light of a portal, but it was softer, warmer. She ran towards it, feeling it was her only chance. When she reached the light, another door appeared in front of her, similar to the one she had seen before, but this time the symbols on its surface burned with a golden light. Katya heard a man's voice. This is your exit. Go through it to take the stone away from their world. The shadows drew closer, their figures almost touching her. Without thinking, Katya pushed open the door and stepped inside. On the other side of the door, Katya found herself in a strange place. Everything around her was bright, but without a light source. The floor beneath her feet was mirrored, reflecting her and the stone in her hands. She heard a voice. You have saved the stone, but this is not the end. This world is only the beginning of the Guardian's journey. Katya sank to her knees, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. Since then, Katya had become part of something bigger. She no longer saw the shadows. But sometimes as she walked past the mirrors, she noticed the faint outlines of their figures, reminding her that they were still searching for a way to return. And each time, the stone in her hands began to pulse quietly, as if warning her that this was only a temporary lull.